I love Crash and Spyro. Love their PS1 games. Their original games still hold up. Each trilogy got their own remake. Crash and Spyro were always known to be PlayStation mascots back in the day. I mean, that was how I viewed them. Crash and Spyro were always known to be PlayStation mascots back in the day. But at some point, these two branched out to other platforms, no longer being an exclusive to the PlayStation. Crash games had kept on going with new games like Crash Nitro Kart, Crash Twinsanity, Wrath of Cortex. Spyro did too, but if I'm honest, the newer Spyro games were never appealing to me at all. I never considered playing the other Spyro games that were out there, like Hero's Tale or the other one I forgot. However, there's a set of games that I feel like are never talked about, that I feel like is worth bringing up right now. Does anyone remember the time Crash and Spyro crossed over? Now, everyone likes a good crossover. This one, however, well, now Crash and Spyro have had their own set of games on the Game Boy Advance. The Crash Game Boy Advance games I feel like almost never get talked about, which is a shame because Huge Adventure and Entrance are solid games for the Game Boy. Spyro also had his own set of Game Boy games. I'm going to be honest, I never really played those, but just by glancing at the gameplay, I'm not sure if I should try them out. Maybe, we'll see. But I want to focus on Crash Purple and Spyro Orange. Now, the idea of Crash and Spyro crossing over in a video game seems like a good idea. However, it's all on how if it can be executed properly. Before I cover the games itself, I want to cover the story for both games first, because the story for these two games are basically the same. The story starts off with Cortex and Ripto together. We don't know why these guys are together in the same room. They just are. I guess these two just know each other. So Cortex had genetically modified Ripto's Ripdocs, disguising them as either Crash or Spyro, so that they can trick the real Crash and Spyro and having each of them think they're evil, so that they can fight each other instead of Cortex and Ripto. Crash and Spyro are immediately alerted in their own respective worlds and try to deal with the disguised Ripdocs. Crash and Spyro eventually go face to face with each other, both thinking of each other as the bad guy. They both fight each other with Molotovs. I don't know why Molotovs. After the battle, they both realize that they're being tricked by Cortex and Ripto. Thus, Crash and Spyro come to an agreement to team up in order to stop this evil duo. That's it. Now, one thing I want to point out is that in Spyro Orange, the cutscenes have less dialoguing compared to Crash Purple. Same plot, it's just one game has a bit more dialogue than the other. Now, I'm going to go over each game individually, starting with Crash Purple, Ripto's Rampage. So if anyone's familiar with the Huge Adventure and Entrance, the gameplay here is similar to those games, except this time the 2D levels have minigames scattered across them, instead of a level select area like the previous game. You'll also find and collect cards as you explore the levels. Each level has up to 5 minigames. At times, Aku Aku guides you to a minigame. In order to play the minigame though, you have to pay with Wumpa Fruit, which you get a lot very easily. Each minigame you complete, you get rewarded with the Power Crystal in order to progress. However, I highly recommend you also get the gems as you are getting the crystals. After you collect 5 crystals in each level, you then have to face the boss. Throughout these levels, you'll find characters from Spyro like Hunter, and of course characters from Crash. Now let's talk about the minigames. Some of them are okay. The one where you're riding the polar bear is fine. The gem minigames are probably the only good ones. There's one where you're free falling and have to hit all the crates. The other is like a time trial. Hit all the crates as fast as you can in a special level. These, however, I'm always coming very close. Also, the gem minigames have these crates that change the color of Crash's pants, for no reason really. When you run into Crunch, he has you doing these weightlifting minigames because he thinks Crash is a pussy. There's a minigame where Crash has a rocket launcher and you have to shoot these sheep to prevent them from blowing up from the nitro crates. A little counterproductive. The river one is the most boring minigame. The toy helicopter minigame is frustrating. You have to shoot these mini tank things, and if some land, Crash can lift a bubble to avoid them. But you can't just hold on like that for the whole minigame, because the yellow or red tanks will shoot you, and then you'll have to start all over. This jetpack minigame is boring. There's one where you ride a bat with the rocket launcher. In this one you have obstacles to avoid, while also trying not to get hit by the enemies, or else you'll have to start the whole thing over. And minigames like this are the long ones. There's also this pinball one, but the worst minigame of them all is this tank minigame. This one sucks. Not only are the controls stiff, but it's also slow and boring. All you're doing is going from point A to point B, but you also really need the gems, so you need to search for all the crates and shoot them. That way you don't have to come back to replay these. Also, you have enemy tanks firing at you, Most of them are bad, except for this one drone that has aimbot. Once you complete all minigames for each area, there's a boss you have to face towards the end. The first boss in Crash Purple is Spyro. You have to fight Spyro by throwing Molotovs at him. Spyro is also throwing Molotovs back. Why Molotovs? I don't know. The second boss is Tiny. This boss isn't fun because you have to control the tank that I complained about earlier. And Tiny has these walls that protect him. They also come up and down every now and then. This boss just sucks. The third boss, you're running away from Nina Cortex. I should mention at this point of the game, Coco and the professor get captured. While you're running away from Nina Cortex, Spyro is rescuing the professor and Coco. All you do here is avoid the obstacles. The fourth boss is Ripto. Now I'll admit, this boss is probably the hardest at first, but after the third try, I had his attack patterns figured out. After you beat Ripto, Cortex and Ripto escape to their base. Crash was apparently supposed to put a tracer on them, but he forgot. Spyro, however, did put one on Cortex. The gang find out that Cortex and Ripto's base is located in outer space, and to get there you need to collect all the gems. Like I mentioned earlier, I highly encourage anyone to get the gems while they're getting the power crystals. The gems in this game are easy to get anyways. Now the final level, one thing I want to say that I admire are the tunes in this level. The music in these games are really forgettable, but the music in this final level I find a little catchy. Now all the minigames in the final level are probably the hardest ones in the whole game. Most of the minigames are fairly easy, a little challenging, and when you get to the final level, you'll notice a difficulty spike across all the minigames you play here. After you beat all the minigames, it's time for the final boss. First, you're being timed. Why? Why are you being timed? And second, of all the bosses in this game, the final boss is really easy. A bit of a letdown, but at the same time a relief. Because at this point of the game, I just wanted to get it done. Unfortunately, there was still the other game to play. Spyro Orange, The Cortex Conspiracy. Now this is very similar to Crash Purple. Right off the bat, the UI is similar. I'm not going to talk about the story because it's the same as Crash Purple, just with less dialogue. For the gameplay, I already feel some sort of delay when controlling Spyro in the levels. So in here, instead of collecting power crystals and gems to progress, there are these portals with a certain shape on them, like triangle or square. These are the minigames. You don't have to pay to unlock these minigames, unlike in Crash Purple. You only have to beat them once in order to unlock the boss gate. You earn gems and cards for completing each gate. Now I'm going to talk about this now, but towards the end of the game, the professor will tell you have to go back to all of the minigames that you just played, and you gotta beat them all 3 times each. So when you're playing the minigames, you have to make sure you beat all of them 3 times. Until the gate turns white. That way you don't have to come back. Now as for the minigames themselves, oh, they're bad. Like, all of them suck. Once again, you have to play all of them 3 times. Now whenever you replay a minigame after completing them once, the difficulty for each minigame slightly increases. Basically it starts off easy, then goes to medium, and then the last difficulty is hard. So let's go over the minigames. The pinball one from Crash Purple is here. It's pretty much the same, but when you replay them, the speed of the pinballs increase. The truck one isn't fun or challenging. On increasing difficulties, there's more obstacles added. There's a tank minigame. Now here, this one isn't as bad as Crash's tank minigame. It's just boring here. You have to shoot and avoid obstacles horizontally. In increasing difficulties, enemies take more hits. In this minigame, Spyro is flying. You have to shoot and avoid obstacles vertically. And the level design to both minigames can catch you off guard sometimes. Like right here, the game lured me to an area and just trapped me. Like, what the fuck? In this one, Spyro is in a spaceship or a glider-like thing. Same thing as the previous minigame, shoot and avoid obstacles vertically. In this one, you're on magnet walking legs. This one also sucks. In here, you can go up or down. There's also traps along the way. You can't see where you're going to land. You also have missiles to pick up along the way. A scientist will immediately show up and you just shoot them. There's a tug-of-war minigame. You just mash the A button. On increasing difficulties for this one, it really isn't that hard. There's another minigame where you have to freeze one Ripdoc. You build up a snowball in this machine by mashing A. There's a bridge minigame where you have to knock the Ripdocs off. 2 of them. Actually, this minigame is in Crash Purple, but only for the Spyro boss. And for this game, this is a minigame you will play more than once. In increasing difficulties, the Ripdocs just walk faster. The other mini games in here are just optional. You don't have to do all of them. The mini games I'm talking about is stuff like Gem Rush. All you get is gems. Gems that you spend on money bags or you purchase cards. These mini games you don't really have to do. Also throughout the levels there are these special obstacles that block your path. These also serve as a mini game, like melt down the ice, put out the fire. You just mash the A button in these. They're super easy. Now, one thing I want to bring up about all of these mini games, there's no retry option on the menu. Why? Crash Purple has a retry option. Why doesn't Spyro have one? Why is there a sleep option? What's the point? But yeah, the mini games here aren't that interesting at all. You have to complete all of them 3 times so that you can unlock the final area. Once you get to the final area, I don't think you have to complete the mini games 3 times anymore. Or I don't think it matters anymore up to this point. Maybe it does, but at this point in the game I just didn't care anymore. Now the boss fights. Boss fights in Spyro Orange are actually okay. The first one you go up against Crash. Same first boss as Crash Purple, only you're Spyro this time. Second boss you go up against Crush and Gulp. This one you have to stun Crush, the blue guy, by ground pounding him and wait for Gulp to hit him. Later in the fight you have to use your fire breath on Crush. He'll point his shield upwards and at some point Gulp will deflect himself. The third boss is Nina Cortex. Now instead of running away from Nina, Spyro actually has to fight her. Because in the cutscenes for both games, Spyro volunteers to fight her. You have to get Nina to run into these crates repeatedly until the cages are knocked over. Once the professor and Coco are free, the fireplace opens and the spikes from the ceiling start to lower. You have to breathe fire on the fireplace to lift the ceiling and escape. And it's after that is when Nina chases Crash. The fourth boss is Dr. Neo Cortex. Notice how they reused this shot. The Cortex fight was really easy. It wasn't even a challenge. And the final boss is the exact same as Crash Purple. Okay, now that I've covered these games individually, I'm going to start comparing some things that these games have. Also point out some minor differences. I'm going to nitpick some fun details. Here's Fake Crash. In Crash Purple, you have to pay for the minigames with Wumpa Fruit that you collect, while in Spyro, you can just play them at no cost. Both games have trading cards, a feature that kind of feels meaningless. Money bags hold a casino in both games. Casino games are similar in both games. Like I mentioned earlier, you can't retry minigames in Spyro. In both games, both Spyro and Crash can be found while you're playing. But in Crash Purple, Spyro just flies away, and you won't see him again until the cutscene. While in Spyro, you'll find Crash across the level you're in. In Spyro, you do learn some new abilities, like being able to flap your wings more. But in Crash, you don't unlock any. In this game, character abilities aren't needed anyway. But I do find it weird how Spyro has like one that you will eventually unlock. When you beat a minigame, Crash has this animation, but Spyro just has this cutscene. Before entering the final level for both games, the cutscenes are different. In Crash Purple, Coco talks about a tracking device that both Crash and Spyro were supposed to use. Here, Crash forgot to plant his, but in Spyro Orange, the tracking device plan was never mentioned or even brought up at all. These games offer multiplayer if you have a Game Boy Advance link cable. Unfortunately, I didn't have a link cable or anyone to play the party modes with, so I can't cover those parts of the game. So in conclusion, which of these games do I prefer? Honestly, I would pick Crash Purple over Spyro Orange. This is their one game crossover. Now look, I still love the Crash and Spyro PS1 games. I kinda wish their crossover wasn't a Game Boy Advance game. Kinda wish this could have been a full console release. Maybe there's a reason why they went with Game Boy. And I don't think these two have crossed over in a full game since. Spyro did appear in CTR Nitro Fueled. Will he appear in the newest Crash Team Rumble? I don't know, maybe. Will these two ever cross over again as full games? Who knows? This could be their only time where these two team up together. The idea of Crash and Spyro coming together in one game is cool, but this was just poorly executed. It is an interesting set of games to play though.